Everyone knows that the Gulf oil spill was a disaster for the region's beaches, wildlife, and workers. But far fewer know about another disaster that's now crippling the Gulf Coast. Like the spill, this crisis is also man-made. It has devastated tens of thousands of workers and their families, and it could end up costing our nation more than the spill itself. In the days after the spill, President Obama declared a moratorium on drilling in the Gulf, which the administration claimed had been peer-reviewed by engineering experts. But these experts denied that they had sanctioned the president's moratorium, complaining that their views had been misrepresented. A subsequent government investigation agreed. According to an Office of Inspector General report, quote, "The decision to invoke the moratorium on current deepwater drilling projects was a policy decision made by Secretary Salazar and President Obama. The report concluded that the moratorium was never peer-reviewed. A federal judge overturned the moratorium because it was in violation of the law and, quote, arbitrary and capricious. After losing an appeal, Interior Secretary Ken Salazar instituted another moratorium, which was identical, a mirror image of the first one. When judges were about to throw out that moratorium, the administration lifted it. And then they did a political end-around to avoid the courts. How did they do it? By perverting safety regulations that took 50 years to develop. For instance, in one regulation, government bureaucrats literally did a find and replace on their word processors to locate every instance of the word should in the regulations and substituted the word must 14,000 times. Job well done, they may have thought. That will keep Gulf workers idle for a while. By ensuring that new deepwater drilling permits would be very difficult to get, the Obama administration has concocted a de facto moratorium on oil drilling. But the courts have not been fooled. A federal judge, seeing the political maneuvering for what it was, found Secretary Salazar in contempt for violating his previous court order. Did the government respect the rule of law? No. This administration continues to maintain its de facto moratorium, and those deepwater rigs in the Gulf, the ones that specialize in oil exploration, are still idle nearly a year later. Many are now leaving to explore in foreign countries, taking our jobs with them. Meanwhile, the American public has been hung out to dry. And it will get worse. The government also opened the door to a sea of environmental activists bent on clogging up the courts with endless litigation, which will also disrupt exploration. These lawsuits are brought by big organizations with deep pockets, such as the Sierra Club, Defenders of Wildlife, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Natural Resources Defense Council, and they are a critical part of President Obama's political base. The results have already been disastrous, and it could get worse. Like a death sentence, the de facto moratorium has devastated hundreds of businesses and harmed tens of thousands of workers on oil rigs, at shipyards, and in mom-and-pop stores. And it even extends across the country to workers who make the equipment and materials used on drilling platforms. In his State of the Union address, President Obama declared, "We measure progress by the success of our people, by the jobs they can find, and the quality of life those jobs offer." Gulf workers wonder how the president can talk so much about jobs while eliminating theirs. Americans have a word for this: hypocrisy. In fact, all Americans are suffering from the de facto moratorium. The Gulf produces about 30% of our nation's total domestic oil and 11% of our domestic natural gas. Cutting off that supply means higher prices for gasoline and heating fuel. Families go without adequate heat in the winter. Getting to work gets more expensive. And basic necessities like food and clothing become less affordable. This at a time when fewer people have jobs. Already, gasoline prices are soaring past two-year highs. But for the Obama administration, this apparently is not enough. The president's energy secretary, Stephen Chu, once told a reporter, quote, "Somehow, we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Americans are asking, should we have to pay $7 a gallon for the sake of a political agenda?" President Obama has long talked about wanting to reverse our dependence on foreign oil, and events in the Middle East show that this is more important now than ever. Why then would the president obstruct energy exploration within the rich reserves off our own Gulf Coast? Of course, other countries haven't stopped or even slowed drilling for oil in deep water. In fact, foreign nations are taking advantage of the president's de facto moratorium by putting our best equipment to work for them. That's right. The oil rigs, the highly trained experts, and the jobs that go with them are being forced to leave our waters. Over the past 6 decades, more than 50,000 oil wells have been drilled safely in the Gulf of Mexico. Companies take numerous safety measures to prevent spills and protect workers. No one wants to pollute our beaches, put workers at risk, subject Americans to unemployment, or spend billions to clean up a spill. It's in everyone's best interest to drill safely so we can all enjoy the natural blessings of our country. And it's the right thing to let businesses get back to work. When an automaker recently announced a recall, the Obama administration didn't force every car maker to recall its vehicles. Similarly, there's no rationale for an industry-wide de facto drilling ban after decades of safe exploration and production. Let's implement lessons learned from the Gulf spill sensibly, while allowing responsible companies and their workers to get back on their feet. President Obama's de facto moratorium is on the brink of wreaking long-lasting and potentially irreversible harm to this country's ability to access oil from the Gulf. The consequences of his self-induced energy crisis only serve to make Americans more reliant on, and vulnerable to, unstable regimes to meet our energy demands. And that means gas prices at an all-time high and more unemployment. While administration officials like Secretary Salazar and Director Michael Bromwich have said that offshore energy reserves are an integral resource for the next 30 years, their policies suggest otherwise. Mr. President, Americans don't take kindly to hypocrisy. You say the moratorium has been lifted, but you can't fool Americans. We know a moratorium when we see one. If you truly cared about jobs and energy independence, you would lift your de facto moratorium and let us all get back to work. We've suffered long enough.